department chant the invocatory Vedam, the Nila Suktam, a hymn to the goddess Nila Devi, one of the three consorts of Lord Vishnu. This Suktam enables one to imbibe patience and forbearance in human beings, symbolized by the bull Tattva.
गणानान्त्वा गणपतिगुं हवामहे कविं कवीनामुपमश्रवस्तमम् ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणस्पत आनशृण्वन्नोतिभिः सीदसादनम् प्रणो देवी सरस्वती वाजेभिर्वाजिनीवती धीनामवित्रयवतु गणेशाय नमः सरस्वत्यै नमः श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ओम् नीला देवी गुं शरणमहं प्रपद्ये गृह्णाहि घृतवती सवितराधिपत्यैः पयस्वतीरन्तिराशानो अस्तु ध्रुवा दिशां विष्णुपत्न्यघोरास्येषाना सहसोऽयमनोता बृहस्पतिर्मातरिष्वोत वायुः सन्धुवानावाता अभिनो गृह्णन्तु विष्टम्भो दिवो धरुणः पृथिव्या अस्येषाना जगतो विष्णुपत्नी ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः.
I now request the guest, Professor Krishna Prabha VP, Director, Professor Srividya N, Dean, Dr. Geeta Bala, Senior Faculty and former Head, Dr. Rani PL, Associate Head in Charge, Dr. Mitali Khanna, to kindly light the lamp to traditionally mark the inauguration of the event. Madams, please. I now request the Chief Guest, Director, Dean and Dr. Rani Pia to kindly honor the stage by taking their seats. Literate, the flagship event of Department of Languages and Literature English, is turning 4. It started in the year 2020 as an online event. The webinar series on life, literature and society has now turned into a webinar cum seminar. Each year, the department has chosen topics that are topical and relevant. Benjamin Franklin says, without continual growth and progress, such words as improvement, achievement and success have no meaning. Here we are, creating meaning, and growth is definitely evident with Literate Edition 4. Invest in our planet is the theme of the World Earth Day 2023, and we believe Earthy Echoes in English literature will be a literary investment aiming for the sustainability of our planet. Earth and its mysteries have always inspired literature. When William Shakespeare said, "Earth has music for those who listen," the romanticist William Wordsworth saw all at once. A host of golden daffodils beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Rabindranath Tagore wrote, "Clouds come floating into my life, no longer to carry rain or usher storm, but to add color to my sunset sky." With industrialization, T.S. Eliot framed the ecological changes thus: April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. K.K. Beriwala too painted different hues of nature with emphasis on the natural calamities. Literature and its close connections with nature is not new, but approaching the ecocentric problems with new outlooks has set in the literary world as a new trend. Texts are revisited from a palette of profound themes and substantial theoretical stands to comprehend the ecocentric ideologies that can help us understand the unfathomable earthy echoes. And here we are to have an intellectual discussion on the same. With erudite speakers to enlighten us on various ecocentric ideas, I am sure that we all will have takeaways from this Literate Edition 4 on Earthy Echoes in English literature. On behalf of Department of Languages and Literature, we now request our Director to present the welcome kit to our Chief Guest, Professor Krishna Prabha VP. Madam, please. Thank you, ma'am. I now request our Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences and Languages and Literature to present the welcome kit to our Director. Thank you, madams. I now request Dr. Rani to present the welcome kit to our Dean. Thank you, everybody. Dr. Mithali Khanna is an alumnus of Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning, from where she received her BA and MA, MPhil and PhD degrees. She received her doctoral degree in 2015 in the area of postmodern theory and poetry, examining the poems of Philip Larkin and Ted Hughes in an applied critique. Dr. Mithali joined Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning as a faculty member at the Department of English Languages and Literature in 2012. Since then, she has immensely contributing her service in terms of academics and research in postmodern poetry and literary criticism and theory. I invite Dr. Mithali Khanna, Associate Head in Charge of Department of Languages and Literature, Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning, Anandapur campus, to deliver the welcome address.
Om Shri Sai Ram. To my Lord and His great grandeur, my earnest gratitude. I pray to our revered Founder Chancellor, Bhagwan Shri Sathya Sai Baba, to preside over the proceedings of Literate Edition 4. Honorable Chancellor, Honorable Vice Chancellor, revered Registrar of the University and Controller of Examinations, eminent educationists as the plenary speakers of the event, respected deans and directors of all the campuses, respected teachers, colleagues, the literary enthusiasts who have registered for the seminars, dear scholars and students of the English department, interested viewers on YouTube, a very warm morning greetings and salam to all. G.M. Hopkins, the 19th century poet, summarizes the upcoming discussion on ecological wisdom in literature in his poem God's Grandeur. So, let us first closely pay heed to the echoes of earth resonating the lines of this sonnet. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. Why do men then now not wreck his rod? Generations have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil. And wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shot. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things, and though the last lights of the black west went, oh morning, at the brown brink eastward springs. Because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. As this sonnet brings to attention man's unmindful interference in the organic ecological processes, and as in academia, in general, every discipline now takes an ecological worldview, there has been carved out an interdisciplinary space that aims to collectively address the painful earthy echoes, all seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil. I deem it my honor to thus welcome one and all to one such platform that will in the next 2 days echo eco-wisdom of the literary enthusiasts and creative writers who through their literary voices have voiced the ecological concerns. A warm welcome to the edition 4th of Literate, a 2-day international seminar on Earthy Echoes in English literature. On behalf of the English fraternity, Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning, I first and foremost extend a cordial welcome to the plenary speakers for this seminar, who are the prominent professionals and illustrious writers and critics in the field of eco-critical studies and English studies in general. Kindly accept our warm reception, Professor Swarnalatha Rangarajan, Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Madras, Ms. Niveditha Subramaniam, Writer, Illustrator, Editor and Researcher, Netherlands, Professor Pramod K. Nair, UNESCO Chair in Vulnerability Studies, Department of English, University of Hyderabad, Dr. Shivani Shivagurunathan, University of Nottingham, Malaysia. Dear Professors, we are grateful to you for your valuable time. We keenly look forward to your sessions. To the esteemed authorities of our universities, deans and directors of all the campuses, heads of all the departments, teachers, scholars and students from all the departments who have joined us virtually, the delegates who have registered for the seminar and are virtually attending it, and all the guests who are viewing the live streaming of SSIH on SSSIHL YouTube channel, I extend my warm welcome to the 2-day proceedings of Literate. I'm extremely now happy to cordially welcome you all for today's proceedings. Hearty welcome to Professor Krishna Prabha, formal head, PG Department of English, who is here with us presiding over the inaugural session in person. Thank you, ma'am, for your consent for the inaugural address and for considering your trip to our campus. My special welcome to the Director, Anantapur Campus, Professor N. Srividya, and Dean of Humanities, Social Sciences and Languages, Dr. Geeta Bala. We are grateful to you for your valuable time and consent to grace the inaugural session. I extend my cordial welcome to the plenary speakers for today, who will be joining us online to address the August gathering. We look forward to listen to Professor Swarnalatha Rangarajan on the topic, The Greening of Literature Articulating an Earth-based Relational Identity in the Anthropocene. I welcome Ms. Niveditha Subramaniam for the second plenary talk today on the Seeding Ideas, Children's Literature and Eco-Consciousness. We look forward to listen to you, Madam. The Faculty of English Department specially welcomes the first, second and third year BA English students, first year and second year MS students, and all the English research scholars seated here to this seminar, and I hope you benefit immensely from this event. I also take this opportunity to extend our very warm welcome to Professor B. Raghavendra Prasad, Vice Chancellor SSSIHL, to Vivian Rajendra Prasad, Distinguished Visiting Faculty, Central University of Andhra Pradesh, and other dignitaries who have graciously given their consent to visit us tomorrow and preside over the valedictory function, which will premiere at 6 p.m. tomorrow and on SSSIHL YouTube channel. My pleasure to once again welcome you all here and on the screen to Lit Treat Edition 4. Hope through this seminar we successfully spread the green word and raise eco-consciousness for a green world. Thank you, Sairam.
Thank you, Madam, for your kind words of welcome. Now I request Dr. Rani P.L., Associate Professor, Department of Languages and Literature in English, former Coordinator for Internal Quality Assurance Cell, currently Advisor to Vice Chancellor and IQAC, Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning, to give the opening remarks for the Literate Edition 4. Dr. Rani joined the department in 1996 as a faculty member on the direct command of Bhagavan Sri Sathya Sai Baba. In addition to her doctoral degree, she cleared the National Eligibility Test for Lectureship and also has a postgraduate certificate in teaching of English from the prestigious English and Foreign Languages University. Her areas of research interest include media linguistics, literature and pop culture, post-colonial studies and ELT. Her deep involvement with curricular and co-curricular activities of the Institute is highly commendable. I request Madam to kindly set the stage for the event.
Reverential pranams. Reverential pranams at the lotus feet of the Divine Founder Chancellor, Bhagwan Sri Sathya Sai Baba, who I believe is present here because we believe in his omnipresence. Collective pranams from the family of DEL, Department of English Language and Literature, for his immensely kind, divine grace and guidance. Guest of honor, Professor Krishna Prabha, Director of the campus, Professor Srividya, Dean, Dr. Geeta Bala, my colleagues from across the campuses, administrators, academic fraternity, literary enthusiasts, online, and my dear colleagues and students on site. Thank you for your encouraging presence at this event. And Megha, most introductions are only expectations. Today is the fulfilling 4th year of this flagship event called Lit Treat. If you did a Google search, Lit Treat comes up only once as an event of the Department of English of Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning, and that makes us proud of this name that we have given to this event. The pandemic struck and we were all stuck indoors. Scientists were busy in the labs trying to fight the virus. Doctors were busy in hospitals trying to save the victims. And we at the Department of English got together to think, what could we do to mitigate this pain and panic? We are neither doctors nor scientists. And that's when the idea of a webinar that will help people cope with what they were going through germinated in our minds. And unanimously everybody said that year the theme could be the spirit of resilience as portrayed in literature. We moved from the book of Job and Raja Harishchandra, about which we had an erudite talk by the Chancellor of the Institute, right up to Matthew Arnold's Scholar Gypsy, Victor Hugo's Java Jean, and many such characters from literature. When we came to 2021, the second edition of Literate, slowly the world was moving into a post-COVID world and wanted to write their stories, wanted to narrate the pain that they went through, and we thought, what better theme than exploring authorpreneurship? We got together the best of writers we could find, Shiv Arur, Usha K.R., Sai Swarupa Iyer, and gave the listeners tips on how they could tell their tales through literature. When we came to 2022, the third edition of Literate, we were stuttering back into a semblance of normalcy. Everything was slowly getting back to offline mode, and hurriedly, because we didn't want to miss the occasion to have the edition 3, we thought this was the time to go back to our roots. This is also the time maybe minds and hearts are open to mythological wisdom, and we worked around the theme of mythological narratives in Indian English writing. And today, as we launch the 4th edition of Literate, we are not far from our dream of recency and topicality in our themes. The UN is talking about SDGs. IPCC is presenting report after report on climate change. COP21 and Paris Accord is striving hard to bring the balance that we need. In fact, I think it's only a week, if I'm right, that the UN meeting at New York is talking about how the SDGs are probably not even achievable, or probably a regressive step even. So there are multiple thoughts on these matters that's going around the world, and what better theme could we think of than Earthy Echoes in English literature. What is eco-criticism? For the unschooled in this area of study, give me a second or two. It's a literary tool to interpret a text's orientation towards the world that it creates, it recreates, and it imagines. And also about the world from which it is born, the text is born, or the world which shapes the text. This is broadly what we do in eco-criticism. It has also received alternative designations like green culture studies. When it traveled from America to the UK, eco-criticism became green studies. And then we have eco-poetics, we have environmental literary criticism, and so on. So why should literature attempt to foray into a field that is conventionally believed to be the forte of the sciences? The word eco itself with its origin from ecology, a biological subject. Why should creative writers foray into this forte? Let me leave you with two thoughts that I have on this. One, Joseph Meeker, one of the founders of eco-criticism, he says eco-criticism, he attributes the growth, genesis of eco-criticism to a special interest in interdisciplinary educational motivations that happened in the US. Is interdisciplinary or interdisciplinarity an academic fad? No. It is a growing need. Need for what? That is what actually impressed me. The need to integrate the different aspects of human life on this planet. Our material goals and our spiritual goals. Our scientific aims and our philosophical thinking. All these need to integrate. Precisely what the founder chancellor also lays stress on when he talks about a holistic, integrated growth in humans. So this is one thing that I think which brings together the inventions of science, the economy of demand and supply, the political policy making of political science, the imaginative, apocalyptic, dystopian expressions in literature, and many such areas together. The second one, and I ought to have said that first, is from one of my youngest students sitting in this room. During her poster presentation that we had on this theme as a lead up to this event the other day, and we had a very impressive round from so many of you. So the youngest in the team said something that stuck in my head. She said, "Science helps us know, literature helps us feel." So I thought, with an example, I can quickly, in the next 3 minutes that I have, prove what she said. In 1962, when Rachel Carson wrote, what is that famous book? Silent Spring, it was an epoch-making thing because that's what triggered eco-consciousness across Europe and North America especially. And at the same time, at least as a child, and I'm sure those my contemporaries will remember, DDT is an abbreviation that we by-hearted from our general knowledge books, dichloro, diphenyl, ethane, because we always needed it in our homes to keep away the line of ants that attacks the kitchen, right, and the food storage. But it was the publication of this book, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, that banned the use of DDT as a very harmful pesticide. In fact, she uses the word biocide to go ahead to expand the understanding of this danger that lurks in the corner. So the year I was born, actually DDT was already banned in the US, and here in my whole of my childhood I was using it to keep away ants. Now, well, that's not the thing I wanted to say. Look at the title of the book, Silent Spring. As students of literature, we should be interested in this. This comes from John Keats's poem, La Belle Dame Sans Mercy. And when we talk about the sedge is withered from the lake and no birds sing, it's practically the situation that environmentalists want to talk about when they talk about global warming or species extinction or any such thing, although that's not the context in which Keats sang it in those days. So we take the help of literature to drive home the points that we want to make scientifically and otherwise. Maybe a second perspective to the need for literature to foray into this area. And I'll make this quick. If you look at the Oxford Handbook of Eco-Criticism edited by Greg Garrard, there is a very interesting essay by, I think it's Michael Branch, and he says, the title of the essay is, "Are You Serious? A Modest Proposal for Environmental Humor." So literature also, while science can give us information, statistics and facts which can be dreary, which can cause a dismal picture. In fact, even the poem of Hopkins that we just heard, or most of the words we used to define or describe this field of eco-criticism are bleak. And here is this writer arguing for a case of environmental humor to drive home the point. And this flexibility, this dynamism is something that literature alone can provide. Humor and satire becoming a very powerful tool. And there are so many examples that he quotes in his essay. I wish I could quote a few, but I won't because the timekeepers are staring at me. So wishing that this event will, I'm sure we are going to have lots and lots of food for thought coming from leading eco-critics in the country like Swarnalatha Rangarajan, Dr. Pramod Nair and the others in the team. We are looking forward to so much of hard stuff to chew in the next 2 days. So I leave you all with the basic understanding and the conviction that literature needs to get in that space of interdisciplinary studies where we say why the ecological crisis that's coming upon us needs to be averted. As much awareness as we can create, that much good for the whole world. So thank you everybody for your patient hearing. Now we set the stage for the core events of the session to begin. Thank you.
Thank you, madam, for your thought-provoking words on literature and its associations with ecological ideas. Currently adjunct faculty, KristuJayanti College, Bengaluru, Professor Krishna Prabha VP was the former head of the PG Department of English in the college. She has also served at the Government Women's College, Trivandrum, and as principal in Tirur Government College. Her passion for teaching literature is evident in her insistence to be introduced simply as a good teacher to her students. Her areas of research interest, lie in indigenous ecological knowledge and eco-consciousness and sustainability, especially from a women-centric perspective. I now invite Professor Krishna Prabha VP to deliver the keynote address on the topic Women and Indigenous Knowledge, a Holistic Paradigm. Madam, please.
Thank you all for the kind words of introduction. God has a reason for allowing things to happen. God has a reason for allowing things to happen. We may never understand His wisdom, but we may have to trust His will. Thank you, Dr. Rani, for inviting me, and thank you, the Dean, the Director, and the entire Department of English for considering my name for this program, for this event, which is the 4th edition, which is one of the unique, kind of event that can be conducted in a campus. As the title indicates, it is the echoes of the earth. And in the morning itself, I could see some beautiful young ladies roaming around in the campus. I think you were listening to the whispering of the earth. What did it whisper? Am I ailing? Did she say that? According to the famous poet C. Subramania Bharati, women were the propagators of civilization, not primarily in the sense of propagating human population, but as the preservers and propagators of culture. Accordingly, women must write the laws and lead society. In his English essay entitled The Place of Woman, he writes, civilization is the taming down of man by woman. Men indeed have till now been trying with scant success to civilize one another by means of the sword and the bullet, the prison cell, but it has been the lot of women to have no other weapon than fables, parables and symbols in her work of civilizing man. Today, I have the privilege of addressing you on a topic of immense significance, the wisdom and resilience of Indigenous women and a pivotal role in shaping the environmental and societal discourse on a global scale. Whether you call women as the custodians of nature or makers of change or guardians of nature or gatekeepers of nature, this is the most demanding topic to be attended at the moment we are already late and in 2023. Before we look at the parables, fables and symbols used by women for civilizing man, we will journey through the key moments in history from the 1970 Chipko movement to the recent UNEP summits celebrating the contributions of Indigenous women to our shared planet. Our story begins in the foothills of the Himalayas in 1970 with the Chipko movement, a group of determined women, mostly indigenous, hugging trees to protect them from being felled by loggers. Their message was clear. The earth's resources are not just commodities, they are a part of our very existence. This grassroots movement, led by women like Gaura Devi, Sundari Devi and Chandi Prasad Bhatt, not only saved forests but also ignited a global environmental consciousness. The 1993 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, Indigenous women played a crucial role in shaping the summit's agenda. They brought their traditional knowledge to the forefront, emphasizing the importance of sustainable practices, biodiversity preservation, and respect for Mother Earth. Their voices influenced the landmark conventions on climate change and biodiversity, signaling a turning point in global environmental policy. In 1995, at the Beijing Conference on Women, Indigenous women from around the globe gathered to amplify their voices. They made it clear that environmental issues were intrinsically linked to women's rights. They advocated for the recognition of traditional knowledge as a vulnerable resource and called for policies that honored the rights and contributions of Indigenous women. Their efforts led to the inclusion of environmental justice in the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. Similarly, the Green Belt movement, the conservation and forestry movement, which originated in Kenya on Earth Day 1977, is another famous effort initiated by women. Moving forward to the 2002 World Summit in Johannesburg, South Africa, Indigenous women continue to be a force of change. They highlighted the devastating impact of climate change on the communities and the urgent need for adaptation and mitigation measures. Their calls for sustainable development were instrumental in shaping the summit's outcomes and reaffirming the importance of Indigenous knowledge in addressing global challenges. Today, Indigenous women continue to be at the forefront of international discussions on environmental sustainability. Their voices are heard at recent UNEP summits, where they advocate for policies that respect the rights of Indigenous people, protect natural ecosystems, and promote sustainable livelihoods. These international agreements indicate that worldwide, women must be equal participants in all decisions related to their environment. Indigenous knowledge, when you look at Indigenous knowledge, why do we call it holistic? That is the most important thing. One thing I would like to say, the moment we reached here, every moment I understand there is a learning experience in the campus because it is holistic. you are providing a holistic experience to the students and teachers and the whoever comes to the campus, because we could experience it, we could breathe it, we could feel it. So similarly, you have to think of why we consider indigenous knowledge as so important. Indigenous knowledge is defined as knowledge which is spatially or culturally, context specific, collective, holistic, adaptive, cumulative, humble, intergenerational, irreplaceable, invaluable, non-linear, observant, relative, responsible, spiritual, unique, and valid. I don't have time to explain all these things. I would have loved to. Across the globe, indigenous women are recognized as custodians of traditional knowledge systems, holding fundamental roles in the preservation and intergenerational transmission. That is, intergeneration, it doesn't come to an end at what particular point of time. The indigenous knowledge systems they preserve encompass indigenous worldviews, facilitating the resilience of the indigenous people, not only to safeguard their intrinsic relationship with Mother Nature throughout history, but also to build their resilience to today's concurrent climate and biodiversity crisis. Indigenous women thus play a crucial role in preserving nature. Furthermore, women have been the storytellers, the weavers of narratives that convey the history, values, and beliefs of their people. I wanted to tell you, beginning my, this address, that when you complain a stomachache to your mother, what does she do? Or your grandmother, she'll be concocting a remedy in the kitchen, isn't it? So this is how, we have been trained, they have cultivated in us, for generations, through stories and through narratives and through beliefs. That is the wisdom of the ancient period. Through oral traditions, they have kept alive the tales of their ancestors, ensuring that the lessons of the past are not forgotten. Aboriginal cultures and languages, when we talk about Aboriginal, you can think about even the Australian Aboriginals, Canadian natives, Canadian Aboriginals, or the Africans, or even, who came under the schedule tribe, because government wanted to give separate provision for them, for their rights and for their beliefs. It has to be protected. Aboriginal cultures and languages throughout the world have historically reflected a harmonious interaction with the natural world. The traditional environmental knowledge systems are based on ethics of reciprocity, respectful relationship, and interconnectedness with the natural world developed over successive generations of local communities. The term indigenous traditional environmental knowledge is used to represent earth-based, wisdom-oriented philosophies and practices of indigenous cultures. As the very identity of indigenous people is inextricably linked with their lands, they contribute significantly to the biodiversity conservation and sustainability of the planet. These holistic knowledge systems can assist in building a life that facilitates learning from everything known and unknown, and to explain the complex relationships between them. Most often, the indigenous communities adopt livelihood approaches by coexisting with nature, following certain indigenous practices passed down from generation to generation. These practices, knowledges, customs, and rituals have helped these communities in predicting weather changes, and even help to identify the medicinal value of plants and herbs grown locally, thus ensuring a fine balance with nature. However, this ecological knowledge remained tacit in orality and have not been validated scientifically, hence not accepted as authentic by modern day science. Today, the languages, practices, rituals, etc. of indigenous communities are facing extinction or a crisis of survival due to the widespread modernization and changes in cultural values and ethics. Traditional knowledge is at the core of indigenous identity, and its transmission from one generation to the next must be preserved, documented, and disseminated for the sustainability of the Mother Earth. Traditional indigenous knowledge can be defined as a network of knowledge, beliefs, and traditions intended to preserve, communicate, and contextualize indigenous relationship with culture and landscape over time. One might distinguish knowledge as factual data, belief as religious concepts, and tradition as practice, but these terms are often used imprecisely and interchangeably to describe indigenous epistemologies. Indigenous knowledge is conveyed formally and informally among kin groups and communities through social encounters, oral traditions, ritual practices, and other activities. Indigenous communities have devised distinctive methods of encoding useful data within philosophies of thought and modes of activity that are linked to particular landscapes. This data includes geographical, genealogical, biological, and other evidence that maps human relations to flora and fauna, land and water, and supernatural forces. Knowledge is often passed on through regular indigenous performances, including oral traditions, songs, dances, and ceremony, that convey both literal and metaphorical truths about these relations. Skilled individuals and families are entrusted to maintain these traditions. Some are specialists who protect esoteric knowledge. Stephen Augustine McMack identifies traditional knowledge as a system that is derived from the survival tactics that indigenous people perfected over generations, preserved in collective memory and community teachings. Thus, knowledge is exercised within the context of social values and philosophies of the tribe. The fact that native science is not fragmented into specialized compartments does not mean that it is not based on rational thinking, but that it is based on a belief that all things are connected and must be considered within the context of interrelationship. That means, when you do literary theories, that there is a point where you have to think in isolation. There is a point you have to think laying it on a social context, on a social fabric. You can't think in isolation because everything is connected, everything is interrelated. Finn et al. Define traditional knowledge as a subset of indigenous knowledge that has been preserved and transferred orally from generation to generation and through cultural expression such as arts, crafts, and ceremonies. More specialized types of information are preserved by gatekeepers who have vested interest and deep experience with and long-standing connections to significant sites. Keepers of oral traditions are often carefully trained to link parts of traditional narratives to specific events and locales, and cultural coherence is ensured by regular repetition. Indigenous knowledge that predates colonialism was once regarded as primitive and unsophisticated. This is what we have seen at the time of colonization, or when we were invaded, when all over the world, when European colonization happened, they were trying to make us believe that it was a civilizing mission, because we were considered, whatever we had, it was considered primitive and it was unsophisticated. So this is the same attitude that is developed in the mind of indigenous people. This cultural bias historically obscured both the structure and practice of this knowledge. Western practitioners posed a serious threat to the integrity of indigenous cultural traditions and territory by regarding them as public scientific property. The tribal and aboriginal women have been a remarkable force of change in our world. Women in the indigenous communities across cultures have a plethora of related knowledge related to medicinal plants, agriculture, techniques for hunting, eco-friendly architecture, ecological knowledge, environmental conservation, traditional medicine, animal husbandry, and others. These women often the unsung heroes, have been making profound strides in the communities and beyond through their traditional knowledge, wisdom passed down through generations. These women are weavers of tradition, the keepers of stories, and the nurturers of the communities. They are the ones who ensure that the rich tapestry of their heritage remains intact. Through their roles as mothers, grandmothers, and community leaders, they pass on the knowledge that sustains the people, enabling them to thrive in harmony with the land. Traditional knowledge held by tribal and aboriginal women goes beyond practical skills. It includes the wisdom of healing, the art of ethical governance, the spiritual insights that guide their communities. Their knowledge is not just a relic of the past, it is a living, evolving resource that holds solutions to some of the most pressing global challenges we face today. Indigenous communities have maintained a delicate balance with their natural surroundings for generations. Their traditional knowledge and practice are a testament to the deep-rooted connection between humans and nature. In the face of environmental challenges such as climate change, deforestation, and resource depletion, Indigenous women are uniquely positioned to provide insights and solutions that respect both people and planet. However, these native gatekeepers face lots of challenges. They often confront discrimination, lack of access to education and resources, and erosion of their cultural heritage. It is our duty to amplify their voices, support their initiatives, and create opportunities for them to share their knowledge on the global stage. Modernization and colonization have led to a changing cultural, ethical, and moral values. Thus, devaluation of indigenous knowledge, lack of rigor in following traditional practices, dislocation of tribal communities due to large-scale development, etc. happened. The world over, the Adivasis and the Aboriginals are the one who have been slowly marginalized by economic growth. By the word Adivasi, we have to understand they are the first people on the land, first people to possess the land. Now they are dispossessed. Are the one who have been slowly marginalized by economic growth and development. They have long periods of undocumented and unknown history, moved or been pushed away from the plains and the fertile lands on the river basins to hills and jungles, elsewhere, even to reservations and other habitations. They are the poor, the disadvantaged, the educationally backward. They are the ones to whom the earth is not something to be used, not a possession or an object for the exploitation, but a living entity, an object of reverence, and the relationship is one of sacred trust and loving intimacy. For they believe as much in celebrating one's life in this world, as in remembering, adoring, and celebrating the world in one's life. A critical aspect of environmental sustainability that often remains overlooked is the exclusion of Indigenous women in policy-making bodies. Ma'am has already mentioned it. Indigenous women, the backbone of the communities, have an intimate and holistic understanding of their environments, making their voices indispensable in the quest for a sustainable future. However, the underrepresentation of Indigenous women in decision-making bodies is a significant barrier to achieving genuine environmental sustainability. These bodies often lack diversity and are dominated by conventional perspectives, which can lead to policies that overlook the specific needs and concerns of Indigenous communities. This exclusion not only perpetuates gender inequality but also hinders effective environmental decision-making. Furthermore, empowering Indigenous women in these roles is not just a matter of environmental responsibility, it is a matter of justice. Women have recognizing their rights and contributions to environmental conservation is an essential step towards rectifying these historical injustices. The knowledge and contributions of Indigenous women are a beacon of hope for our planet. From the Chipko movement in 1970 to the recent UNEP summits, they have been unwavering in their commitment to protecting our environment and preserving their cultural heritage. It is our responsibility to listen, learn, and support their efforts as they lead the way towards a more sustainable and equitable world. Before I conclude, I would like all of you to draw inspiration from the famous Chief Seattle speech, which beautifully encapsulates the interconnectedness of all life forms and the importance of preserving cultural heritage. Chief Seattle, a prominent leader of the Squamish Duwamish tribes in the 19th century, once spoke these words: "The earth does not belong to us, we belong to the earth." These words remind us of the profound connection that indigenous people have always had with their environment. They understood that their cultures and knowledge were deeply rooted in the land they inhabited. As we reflect on Chief Seattle's words, we should also acknowledge that the earth's health is intricately linked to the preservation of indigenous knowledge. The wisdom of indigenous women teaches us the importance of respecting and caring for the environment. Their sustainable practices remind us that we must tread lightly on this planet if we are to ensure a harmonious future. In conclusion, women's indigenous knowledge and cultural memory are treasures that enrich our global tapestry of diversity. Just as Chief Seattle emphasized the interconnectedness of life, all life, we must recognize the invaluable role that indigenous women play in preserving our collective heritage and the ecosystems that sustain us. Their wisdom teaches us not only about the past but also guide us towards a more sustainable and harmonious future. Let us honor and celebrate their contributions, for they hold the keys to a world where humanity and nature coexist in harmony. Thank you. You have a line of expert speakers, for today and tomorrow, and I wish you a great learning experience for 2 days on eco-culture or eco-criticism or cultural memory, collective memory, racial memory, where, as students of literature, you are, your research and your search, it is not confining you, should not confine you to one discipline, that is English literature. It has to go interdisciplinary. It has to be done from multidisciplinary angles, looking at the holistic, knowledge that we are going to examine, and the holistic way we are, trying to sustain the Mother Earth. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for sharing with us your ideas on traditional, indigenous, intergenerational ecological knowledge that every indigenous woman has with her. So that was a very interesting session, ma'am. Now I request a director, Dr. Srividya ma'am, Dean Dr. Gida Bala ma'am, and our former head, Dr. Rani Piyal, our associate head in charge, Dr. Mitali Khanna, to kindly felicitate the speaker, Professor Krishna Prabha VP. I welcome Professor Krishna Prabha ma'am to kindly receive the memento, a token of our love. Please, madams.
Saida, I know I'm out of the schedule, but I thought I just take quick 2 minutes. appreciate this two-day international conference, the Literate Edition 4. When we visualize and conceptualize some event, we may go on it in a theoretical basis. But what I wanted to appreciate was that it has really been integrated in their thoughts, words and action. From the way the decorations are put up, the mementos are being given, the retreat for what has been put here, everything really echoes your theme. So I really wish, and of course a very nice lineup of speakers and talks. I wish I was more free to attend it, but since we have the digital storing happening, I am sure I will go back to it whenever I have time. I just really wish all the participants, please make sure you take home the knowledge by all these very renowned speakers who are being lined up for you. All the best to all the organizers. Saira.
Thank you, ma'am. It is now time for the much awaited plenary sessions. I request Ms. Pratiksha Pradhan, Research Scholar, Department of Languages and Literature English, to kindly introduce the speaker for the first plenary talk of the event. Ms. Pratiksha Pradhan.
Saira ma'am. I offer my humble salutation at the divine lotus feet of our Mother Sai. I consider it my privilege to introduce to all of you the first plenary speaker of the day, Professor Swarnalatha Rangarajan. Professor Swarnalatha Rangarajan is a distinguished figure renowned all over the academic world for her exceptional contribution in the field of eco-criticism. She holds a PhD in English from the University of Madras. She was a recipient of a Fulbright pre-doctoral fellowship to Harvard University and the UGC's Senior Research Fellowship. She was also the winner of the Thomas Wolfe International Student Essay Prize. Professor Rangarajan's research project on titled The Role of Religious Text in Forging an Ecological Self was funded by IC&SR IIT Madras. She was selected for a fellowship grant by the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Shimla, for her research project titled Women Writing Nature. She also received an IUC fellowship at the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Shimla. Besides being a Charles Willis India Trust Visiting Fellow at Cambridge University, she also bagged an Esler Translation Award with Srijit Verma. Professor Rangarajan was awarded an exploratory research project grant by IIT Madras for investigating gynocritics interviews with contemporary women writers from Tamil Nadu with Professor K. Srilatha. Her wide range of publication includes 9 books and many publications in reputed national and international journals. Her research interests span a wide range of areas within the field of eco-criticism, such as environmental ethics, urban eco-criticism, life places and eco-criticism, swamp speak, and many more. She is currently a professor of English at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Madras. Professor Rangarajan, we are honored to have you for the Literate Edition 4, and your presence will undoubtedly enrich the session and foster valuable discussions. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you so much, Pratiksha, for that very kind and warm introduction. Sairam, it's a pleasure to be a part of this important conference on Earthy Echoes in English literature. I was listening to the wonderful introductory talks which kind of set the field, and I'd like to thank the Department of English for their very warm introduction. Am I clear? I mean, is my voice carrying over? I'm so sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am. It's clear.
Yes, thank you so much. I need somebody to do flip the slides for me, so can somebody take care of that? Thank you so much.
2 minutes, ma'am, yet.
Yes. So the title of my talk is rather long, The Greening of Literature, Articulating an Earth-based Relational Identity in the Anthropocene. So that's quite a mouthful, so I'd like to meditate on the key word of my talk, identity, before I go on to discussions on nature and literature. So the word identity derives from the Latin idem faceo, which means to make similar what is dissimilar. So contrary to this original meaning, identity politics is today all about a fossilized expression of a culture that aims to exclude the other, both human as well as other than human. So if we are talking about an enlarged expression of selfhood, the larger self, or if we want to define ecological identity, what would it be? So ecological identity refers to how people perceive themselves in relation to nature as living and breathing beings connected to the rhythm of the earth. So my talk today will reflect on what it means to be human in the age of the human, namely the Anthropocene. The next slide, please. Anthropocene. Right? So who and where we are is a complex, riddled question in the Anthropocene, a term coined by Eugene Stormer in the 1980s and popularized by Nobel-winning Paul Crutzen in the 2000s. It's a disputed term referring to a new epoch in which human actions have irreparably affected the planet. The word Anthropocene itself entered the Oxford English Dictionary surprisingly late, along with other words like selfie and upcycle, in June 2014, nearly 15 years after it was used by Crutzen in a conference. So back to the Anthropocene. I mean, all of us know this. The previous speakers have drawn attention to how we live in a world where the impact of humanity on the Earth's natural processes and systems is becoming frighteningly evident. For example, atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide have recently passed the dreaded 400 parts per million ppm threshold. It came down drastically during COVID, but it's back again. So whether we are talking about biodiversity laws or the vanishing of species, which is happening 100 times faster than with human interference, all this points to what scientists call the Earth's sixth mass extinction, right? The first, which is caused by humans. So to use Carl Jasper's term, we are entering a new epochal consciousness. Therefore, old words like wilderness, wildlife, nature, the ocean, none of these have the same literal referent as they did 100 years ago, and their cultural resonances have drastically changed. The seas and oceans, for example, can clearly no longer stand for images of a vast, inhuman, pristine, and unchangeable force. Instead, they are menacingly damaged entities touched by human waste and dying creatures, vast dumping sites, as well as residual symbols of the elemental. So the next slide, please. the Anthropocene register. That slide. So I'd like to draw your attention to what Robert Macfarlane, a British writer, put together for this purpose. He called it a desecration phrasebook because he wanted to create a new vocabulary for the drastically deranged nature in the Anthropocene. So to put together such a glossary, we will need to record details of topographies of toxicity and pollution and the extinction that we have caused. Document, for instance, the trash vortices that swirl in the gyres of the world's great oceans. Or we need to invent terms for the deep geological repositories in which we have entombed nuclear waste. So Macfarlane asks, is there a word yet for the post-natural rain that falls when a rocket, when a cloud is rocket seeded with silver iodide, or an island newly revealed with the melting of ice in the Northwest Passage, or the glistening tide marks left on coastlines by oil spills? So is there a word, right? Because the Holocaust writer Paul Celan came up with an unforgettable phrase. He speaks about word caves which are hollowed out by laws. So language is also experiencing that, word caves hollowed by laws when we talk about the Anthropocene. So Macfarlane quotes Philip Larkin, the poet, who said, "What will survive of us is love." And Macfarlane says, no, wrong. What will survive of us is plastic and lead-207, the stable isotope at the end of uranium-235 decay chain. So we have a lot of works on the Anthropocene. I'm just going to mention one important work, which came out in 2015, Gaia Vince's Adventures in the Anthropocene. So this is the best book so far, which talks about the epoch's impact on the world's poor and the slow violence that climate change metes out to them, right? And we can also talk about new words which have come up. For example, Glenn Albert's concept of solastalgia, right? Solastalgia, which is a form of psychic or existential distress caused by environmental change, right? I don't know, for those of us who've read Sarah Joseph's latest novel, Budaning, that's a good example of a solastalgia novel. So what happens when, the speaker before me, ma'am, spoke so eloquently about indigenous displacements. So what happens when a dam is constructed where people who've been living there for eons are suddenly displaced, forced migrations? What happens when a home finds itself near a new industrial site, a motorway or a mining operation? Or what happens if a land is recurrently hit by drought, right? So this solastalgia is an Anthropocene contribution to language. Other words are words like shadow time. Shadow time literally means the sense of living in two or more orders of temporal scale simultaneously. So today it's a nice, warm, pleasant day in Chennai. It's not very hot. It's very, very pleasant. But there is also the awareness that we are all living through frightening global warming and climate change. That's the long-term scale which is operating, but we tend to forget it. So we mostly respond to the Anthropocene with stuplimity. Stuplimity is the aesthetic experience in which astonishment is united with boredom, right? Because the Anthropocene is a funny thing. It blurs and even scrambles crucial categories by which people have made sense of the world. It blurs the line, for example, between nature and culture, all those dichotomies of human and the non-human, human and the geological. So everything is mixed up. Everything is a mesh, to cite from Timothy Morton's resident book. So the question of identity, to come back to my title, is vital in the Anthropocene because it marks a declension point when the death of the species and perhaps even the death of the earth is at stake. So the figure of the human needs to be redefined in the mesh. I'm using Timothy Morton's term again. Philosopher Michael Serres refers to this process as hominiscence, an incomplete process where everything regarding the human has to be reimagined, mediated, thought about. So we can kind of summarize the whole debate around the Anthropocene and say it's an event where nature and second nature converge, a messy point of confluence. So art perhaps harbors a possibility to connect to this nature to come, right? And the idea that the roots of the ecological crisis are to be found in the failure of imagination is already a point which the first lecture, opening lecture, spoke about. And therefore, literary studies have an important role to play in understanding and overcoming this crisis. So I would say that the work of an eco-critic can be seen as one of reimagination, to change the imaginary of her or his culture. So this is the basis of innumerable eco-critical strands of thought that trace environmental destruction back to primary cultural or socio-political factors, and producing readings based on a faith that environmental destruction can be remedied by cultural means. So I have this wonderful example given by poet John Passmore. John Passmore would often, reach out to his audience, I mean, obviously students, and tell them, please define a weed, right? I'm sorry, I'm not there in person, otherwise I could have taken an input from you. Can somebody define a weed, please? W-E-E-D, what is a weed? So we need to understand the difference between problems in ecology and ecological problems, right? Problems in ecology, there are many weeds. So you need pesticides to get rid of them. So can eco-critics do it? No. So problems in ecology is not, no, we can still be on the same slide. So, but defining a weed belongs to the domain of eco-criticism. So what is a weed? Anybody can respond. What is a weed? Any responses? What is a weed?
An unwanted useless plant, ma'am.
Sorry, did I hear an unwanted? Sorry, can somebody repeat that for me?
Unwanted, useless plants.
Yes, unwanted, that is the word, unwanted. So if you look at IIT Madras, for instance, we have the KHD in huge numbers, and the Tamil Nadu government said, well, Precipice drinks up groundwater, so get rid of it, and we had to comply. And in a day's time, the Precipice jungle was gone. And, there are so many small beings who are dependent on the precipice plants, but it just went. So the Tamil Nadu government defined precipice as a weed. But if you look at another variety of precipice, the KHD plant in Rajasthan, for instance, that is revered almost with, as a divine plant, because it's extremely drought resistant and people use the KHD to feed cattle. So is KHD or is the precipice a weed? It appears to be a weed in Chennai, but it does not appear to be a weed in Rajasthan. So we can perhaps say that, the weed just happens to be the right plant in the wrong place. That's one way of, sensibly defining a weed. So how to define a problem or how to frame an environmental problem properly, because all these environmental discourses lie submerged in cultural spaces. So that is the job of an eco-critic. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So if you look at this, the next slide, yes. So this is an example of, Anthropocene art. So Mary Mattingly's photo of a naked woman, and she is burdened by this, huge, it's almost the modern Sisyphus, right? At least Sisyphus, the Greek mythology, was carrying the rock. But here, the human figure is eclipsed, and the rock is composed of plastic, debris, everything that we have created. The next slide, please. The next slide, please. Okay. So this is Kegua's, bund installation. So you have a barge, and this is perhaps a kind of statement of the kind of pollution that the Shanghai River undergoes on a daily basis, perhaps. So you have it's like a Noah's Ark, but all these animals are dead, stuffed animals. So this kind of an installation art is supposed to kind of shock you, tease you out of your sensibility, perhaps. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. So this is a beautiful website. I would encourage all of you to visit it. Maya Lin's What is Missing. So this is a kind of online memorial for lost species. It's in the form of a map of the world, marked with a lot of clickable e-dots. So you will find a lot of little notes right from the scientific names to personal memoirs relating to that particular species. Some of them are there, some of them are extant. So, but when you enter that website, there is a deep sense of loss. You also, because all Anthropocene art makes a forceful point about human violence, and it appeals directly to a guilt about what we've done to a nature which we formerly divinized, a pure, pristine nature. Can we go to the next slide, please? Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes. So this is the famous Birth of Venus, Botticelli's masterpiece. So this is a recreation of the Birth of Venus. So do you see anything? I'm sorry, I think it's not very clear, but I'm sure you at least get a sense of it. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the Birth of Venus is made of thousands of plastic bags. You can't make out unless you go very close to the picture, right? So this is again an installation art by Chris Jordan, right? So in the Anthropocene, what I would say is that we need a kind of, a special kind of a scale to understand what's happening. Because unless, if you go too far away from the portrait, you will only see Venus. If you come too close, you will see the bags. But you need to go back and forth. In other words, there is a lot of violence happening in small pockets, right? But today when we speak about globalization, or when we speak about India shining or rising, we are not able to see the plastic bags. So we need to go close, and we need to move away, right? We need to step back from a hubris. So this stepping forward and also going close is what we call the transscalar imaginary. Next slide, please. So in the Anthropocene, we need to ask ourselves how art or writing can make massively distributed processes that take place on a biospheric scale more tangible and integrate them into everyday awareness. For example, all of us know climate change is happening, but unless it hits us in a very visible way, we don't bother about it. So most of environmental violence is massively distributed, although it can be intensely located, in pockets. So we need memory, we need imagination to remember what the big picture looks like. And it is always important to think about the big picture. The next slide, please. Next slide, please. No, the slide before that. Yes, thank you. So, what is nature? I come to that question because I've been talking so far about how nature has been modified by humans in the Anthropocene. So, I'd like to begin with my very favorite quote. This is attributed to a 12th century Zen master, Qin Yuan, who enters a Zen monastery. I'm sure all of us know this point about Zen monasteries. You're given a koan to puzzle about, right? The koan would be as cryptic as what is the sound of one hand clapping? And if you come up with an answer right away, the Zen master will beat you with a stick. The idea is to go beyond language, to go beyond, the formal structures of language, to enter a reality which is beyond language. I think that's the idea of Zen awakenings. But look at this beautiful, step-by-step discourse on enlightenment. Before I had studied Zen for 30 years, I saw mountains as mountains, waters as waters. When I arrived at a more intimate knowledge, I came to the point where I saw that mountains are not mountains, waters are not waters. But now that I've got this very substance, I'm at rest, for it's just that I see mountains once again as mountains and waters once again as waters. So this is a Satori moment, the moment of enlightenment. And the master asks at the end of the discourse, are the three understandings the same or different? Well, this is a question which is very relevant for our troubled environmental times. So the master passes through stages of ecological enlightenment. In the beginning, he takes nature for granted. Mountains are mountains, waters are waters. And then in the second phase, mountains are not mountains, waters are not waters. He goes on to reduce nature to a mere construct of the mind, a sign within a signifying system. And in the end, realizing his folly, he enters into a larger enlightenment, which includes mountains and waters as well as minds. So next slide, please. Various schools of critical theory since the 1960s have participated in the project of denaturalization of nature, the revision of which is one of the primary aims of eco-criticism. It has become obligatory to declare that there is no such thing as nature, since nature has been reduced to a term within a cultural discourse, a sign within the signifying system. Right? Eco-philosopher Kate Soper says it is not language which has a hole in the ozone layer, but the real thing continues to be polluted and degraded even as we define our deconstructive insights at the level of the signifier. So the real thing that Kate Soper talks about is difficult to define. Raymond William astutely voiced the same concern when he said, nature is perhaps the most complex word in the language. So the slide there talks about Bill McKibben's influential book on climate change, written for a general audience. It's called The End of Nature, not The Death of Nature, The End of Nature. This book discusses how nature, as we know it, has ended due to excessive modification of the earth by humans, right? And next slide, please. And McKibben brings to our attention to the idea that we have changed the atmosphere, we are changing the weather, we have deprived nature of its independence, and that is fatal to its meaning. Nature's independence is its meaning, and without it, there is nothing but us. This would be the Mesozoic era, the age of great loneliness, because when we start killing off other species, we may be perhaps the only species left. So cultural theorists and scientists refer to it as the age of loneliness, Mesozoic era. So the end of nature, more than anything, is the end of an idea, right? The idea of an independent, mysterious force that is beyond human control. Nature in this new paradigm is reduced to a problem that needs to be worked out through human intervention. So can we have the next slide, please? Next slide, yes. So Timothy Morton, who is again one of the influential cultural critics in eco-criticism, has a book provocatively titled Ecology Without Nature. Look at the title, Ecology Without Nature, 2007, published in 2007. So Morton argues that the very idea of nature as a transcendental, independent term which informs arts, ethics, philosophy, and ecological politics may have to become obsolete with a heightened understanding of what truly constitutes ecological thinking. So the ecological thought does not refer to natural things alone. On the other hand, it denotes the interconnected mesh of everything that surrounds us and of which we are a part. So Morton concludes famously that in order to think in a truly ecological way, we'll have to let go of nature, nature with a capital N. So the essence of the new ideas is the notion of coexistence. We can coexist with human life forms, non-human life forms, non-life forms, the ecosystem, biosphere, climate, planet, solar system, call it whatever, a multiple series of nested Russian dolls, right? The next slide, please. So I'd like to take a small detour for a minute and speak about the Gaia hypothesis, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. James Lovelock, who was a scientist studying Mars, came up with a very strange discovery. He realized that the lithosphere, cryosphere, hydrosphere of the Earth, along with other layers, were actually behaving as one system, because the Earth's temperature must have been much, much hotter than it is today, despite climate change and all that. But the Earth seemed to, interact with its various layers and, keep temperatures stable. So when he, discussed this finding with his writer friend William Golding, he said, I need to name this, very effectively. And therefore, William Golding said, why did you call it the Gaia hypothesis, after Gaia, who creates the entire Earth out of her own body? So the Gaia hypothesis has been refuted. Lovelock has, so I'm not worried about that. I'm only interested in this powerful suggestion that, the Earth is actually, functioning as a cybernetic feedback system. So everything is interconnected. So quantum physics tells us that, at a quantum level, the way an observer looks at the observed changes the object of observation. So quantum interconnections crisscrossing the universe. So that's what selfhood is, right? That's an interesting point. So we can say that the Anthropocene is an era of complex entanglements between nature, other than human forces, and human action, because that's important. So today we are talking about an entangled humanism. It is not just humanism, an entangled humanism. In this new paradigm, nature is no longer the passive background, but nature is an active protagonist. Hence, the dichotomy between agential man and passive nature is fundamentally challenged. So the major insight that Anthropocene offers is a larger concept of selfhood. Donna Haraway calls it a becoming with. So becoming with is a performance, a cultivation of interconnection, an act of resistance against threats, exclusion, which inevitably involves how we tell stories through and with other stories. So the Anthropocene is a clarion call to new modes of knowing, new modes of engaging in ways that are less human-centered or anthropocentric. So the Anthropocene is bound with an ethical demand, right? It announces our need to inhabit the world in a spirit of mindful accountability, not just to those who live with us now, but to all those multi-species generations who've come before and who will still come after us, right? So how many minutes do I have? I'm sorry, I'm losing track of time. I can go on till 10:10, or should I stop it? Sorry, at 11:10.
We have 10 minutes more.
Sorry?
10 minutes more, ma'am.
10:10? Oh.
10 minutes more, ma'am.
10 minutes more. Sorry, I'm not able to hear you very clearly.
Ma'am,
I stopped
till
I stopped
10:55.
plan, right?
Saira, ma'am, ma'am can wrap within 10:55, ma'am. Another 15 minutes, ma'am.
Can you please just type in the chat box? I'm not able to hear them.
Ma'am, you have 10 more minutes.
I have 10 more minutes.
Yes, ma'am, you can go on till 10:55, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So, to cut a very long story short, I was talking about how Anthropocene narratives crisscross various areas. They connect the personal and the political, the home and the world, the rural and the urban, the human and the more than human, the local and the global. And all this, next slide please, will help us enter what eco-philosopher and deep ecologist Alan Drenson refers to as free narrative spaces. So according to Drenson, one of the important functions of eco-criticism is the articulation of free narrative spaces that are more or less liberated from controlling stories. There is no master narrative. All stories have to be listened to. All stories need to be allowed to emerge, because only in free narrative spaces do we find alternative tales of sustainability and earth democracy. So beat poet and bioregionalist Gary Snyder famously remarked that narratives are one sort of trace that we leave behind in the world. All our literatures are leavings. So I will say that eco-criticism is a part of this gestalt and grand storytelling attempt. It can be called the story of all things, whether we are talking about indigenous people, when we are talking about all people who undergo marginalization and exclusion, whether we are talking about the animal others, the plant others, whether we are talking about spiritual ways to live on earth, to celebrate earth. Everything is about an individual story, and all these stories have to be listened to and perhaps appreciated, right? So let me just do a quick, next slide, please. Next slide, please. I'm going to take you to a whirlwind tour of the waves of eco-criticism. So since the 1960s, there has been an extraordinary surge of important North American writing about the relationship between human beings and the natural world. So this body of literature is called nature writing or environmental writing. And of course, the important landmark in its history is the founding of ASLE, the Association for Study of Literature and the Environment in the United States in 1992. Now ASLE has branches all over Japan, United Kingdom, India, Ireland, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Taiwan. You have ASLE ASEAN, ASLE Brazil, Bangladesh, name it. So, and you have the European ASLE, EASLCE in Europe. So what is eco-criticism basically? I think if you look at the slide, next slide please. Yes. So I'm sure you recognize this as Blake's engraving, a little boy trying to lasso the moon saying, I want more, I want more. The term eco-criticism was first used by William Ruckert in his essay Literature and Ecology, but the roots of this earth-centric literary theory lies deep in the past, right? India can boast of the Thirai theory from Sangam literature, where the 5 eco zones, where deities, the way of life, literature, everything was seamlessly integrated. So Scott Slovic, a foundational eco-critic, talks about how after more than 3 decades of doing work in eco-criticism, I still cannot point the source, the Earth text of eco-criticism. So you can just think of eco-criticism as, let's split the word. Oikos, which means household, and kritis, which means to judge. So oikos is nature, our largest homestead, and kritis is an arbiter of taste who wants to keep the house in good order. No boots or dishes strewn about to ruin the original decor. Next slide, please. Yeah, you can go, next slide. Next slide. Yes, thank you. So the first wave began in the 1980s. It defined nature as natural environment. It focused solely on British and American literature and argued for the protection and preservation of natural environment from marauding humans. So the first wave did not take into account any writings from the global south or from the urban cities. But the second wave, which happened in the mid-1990s, moved away from dichotomized discourses of nature writing to a more inclusive dialogue which included urban landscapes in addition to wilderness, rural scapes, multicultural voices, multiple genres. So the third wave, which dates back approximately to the year 2000, is marked by a comparative tendency across national and ethnic cultures. So Johnny Adamson and Slavic in the 2009 special issue of Melis defined the third wave as an insurgence of a diversity of voices contributing to the understanding of the human relationship to the planet. So eco-criticism of this period is marked by concepts such as eco-cosmopolitanism that reveal the dialectical tension between the local and global sense of place. So the fourth wave was defined by Slavic in the autumn 2012 issue of ISLE as the focalization of theory on the fundamental materiality of environmental things, places, processes, forces, experiences. So Slavic cites path-breaking works like Material Feminisms by Stacey Alaimo and Susan Heckman, which emphasize the inherent materiality of the human body and the natural world, and draw attention to how the retreat from materiality and its denial has had serious consequences for feminist theory and practice. Next slide, please. The fifth wave is a very, very recent thing. All of us are in the fifth wave. So fifth wave is about the tendency of scholars to go public with their social and environmental concerns, writing not just for academic journals, but also for popular media, talking about it, writing about it, singing about it. Anything is considered fifth wave, blogs, mass distribution, news outlets, so on and so forth. I don't know, I was planning a longer lecture, but I think I just have 5 minutes more. Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am. 5 minutes.
Yes. So I'm going to conclude with the next 3 slides. The next slide, please. The next slide. Okay. Yes. So the relational self. Thich Nhat Hanh, a very respected Vietnamese Buddhist monk, nominated for the Alternative Nobel Prize. This is how he would preach, right? He would hold up a piece of paper, a blank piece of paper, and ask the audience, what do you see? I'm sorry, I can't take a live feedback, but what do you see? What do you see? And most people would tell him, well, I see a piece of white paper. I don't see anything on the paper. Responses would be as varied. So, but Thich Nhat Hanh would say, can you see the tree which made the paper? Can you see the cloud? Can you see the rain? Can you see the sun? Can you see the soil which supported the tree? Then he would go on and say, can you see the man who cut the tree? Can you see the cat which took the tree logs to the lumber mill? Can you see the carter's family? So he would go on tracing these deep connections, and he would say the entire universe is contained in a sheet of paper. So if everything is interrelated, that nothing has its own self-contained existence. So that is Thich Nhat Hanh's deep insight about our interrelatedness, right? So the next slide, please. That would be the last slide. The next slide. Yes. So since I have to bring the literature element, sorry, I was planning, the poem. No. Yes. So I was planning on doing a lot of literary text, but for paucity of time, I'm just going to restrict myself to this because this is a beautiful example of an ecological poem. Gary Snyder, who began his career as a beat poet. But one day, when he heard about the Hiroshima and Nagasaki disasters, I think he made a vow to devote himself to the earth, to the people of the earth, to the preservation of the earth. So what we have here is a truly ecological poem, because an ecological poem is about energy circuits, about how we are connected. It's also about gift economies, right? We get so many gifts from nature. So what is the gift economy, right? That might be another perspective on the meaning of ecology. So we are living, so to speak, in the midst of a great potluck feast to which we are all the invited guests, and we also end up being the meal. So take a look at this beautiful poem for a minute. Eating the living germs of grasses, eating the ova of large birds, the fleshy sweetness packed around the sperm of swaying trees, the muscles of the flanks and thighs of soft-voiced cows, the bounds of the lamb's leap, the swish in the ox's tail, eating roots grown swell inside the soil, drawing on life of living clustered points of light, spun out of space, hidden in the grape, eating each other's seed, eating each other, kissing the lover in the mouth of bread, lip to lip. So is this poem, what is this poem about? This poem is about the deep material ties that we enjoy with each other. We are not aware of it. We are not tuned into, these multiple myriad guests. So Gary Snyder would say, since he is a practicing Buddhist, the being who is willing to give away even his enlightenment or her enlightenment is called the Bodhisattva in Buddhist terminology. So in some of the Polynesian societies, the big person or the most respected and powerful figure in the village was the person who had nothing. Whatever gift came to her or him was promptly given away again. So that's the real heart of a gift economy. The economy that would save, not devour. So because Gandhi once said, for greed all of nature is insufficient. So art takes nothing from the world. It's a gift and an exchange. It leaves the world nourished. So poems, novels, plays with their great deep minds of story awaken the heart of compassion. So ecological literature teaches us how to be a part of the great green earth Sangha. Thank you so much for your time and patience.
Thank you, ma'am, for your energetic presentation on the topic, the greening of literature articulating an earth-based relational identity in the Anthropocene. I'm sure that the idea of earth-based relational identity that you have proposed will help us chart our new paths of research and inquiry in the area of eco-criticism. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Ma'am, here is the certificate and memento as a token of appreciation from the Department of English, Languages and Literature, Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning, Anantapur campus.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, we will mail it to you and post it to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Now I request Ms. Harshita, Research Scholar of English Department, to introduce the speaker for the second plenary talk of the event. Over to you, Ms. Harshita.
Ms. Pratiksha. Now we shall be moving on to the next session in the series of plenary talks as a part of our event, Lit Treat Edition 4, an international seminar on Earthy Echoes in English literature. We've all been children and have experienced childhood in myriad ways. It is almost impossible to remember our days of innocence without the backdrop of the spaces in which we grew up. But I am sure the greens and the blues of the days we spent in mud and rain are cherished for our life. But do children of today enjoy the world the same way we enjoyed it? Do they imagine the same clear brooks and smell the crisp air while they read Ruskin Bond's stories or read Wordsworth's poems? In a world facing unprecedented environmental challenges, the role of literature in shaping young minds towards eco-consciousness has never been more critical. Children's literature, with its capability to captivate and educate, serves as a potent tool for sowing the seeds of eco-consciousness in children. Talking to us in an interactive session titled Seeding Ideas, Children's Literature and Eco-Consciousness is the speaker for this session, Miss Niveditha Subramaniam. I deem it my privilege to introduce her. Ms. Subramaniam is a writer, illustrator, editor and an independent researcher originally from the coastal city of Chennai, India, and is currently based in Rotterdam, Netherlands. She completed her Bachelor's of Arts in English from Stella Maris College and went on to pursue her Master's in Children's Book Illustrations, Children's Literature, Media and Culture from esteemed universities abroad. She has also served as a creative writer in Chandamama and also as an editor at Pulika Publishers. She has published picture books, teen fiction, and even illustrated a graphic novel for young adults. In 2015, she received the Bal Sahitya Puraskar awarded by the Sahitya Academy, India's Academy of Letters, for the book Mile Will Not Be Quiet. She has also brought out a picture book titled Amul's Bottle Boat in collaboration with WWF India, which addresses the issue of plastic waste accumulation in the water bodies across the world. Her books have been recommended by the CBSE and NCERT boards of education for reading in schools and libraries across India. She is a Charles Wallace India Trust Arts Scholar from 2015 to 2017 and an Erasmus Mundus Scholar from 2019 to 2021. We are extremely honored and privileged to have you with us today virtually. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Harshita, for a very generous introduction, and thank you, Dr. Srinivasan, and to the department and the university for having me here today. I got to listen to Dr. Rangarajan just now speaking, I think, and touching upon so beautifully. I think her session feels like, and what I've got to listen to, because it's still relatively early here, of her session has, left me feeling quite charged to talk about eco-consciousness in the context of children's literature today with you. Particularly what she just shared about stories as leaving traces. I think such a beautiful, such an empowering notion. I'm so happy that I could listen to that, and so I hope that I'm also going to be starting my session with a story today, because eco-consciousness is it's such a big word. It's such a daunting word, even, that how do we make sense of it? And I find that stories are perhaps the most accessible, stimulating, and really nourishing spaces to make sense of something as vast and even intimidating as eco-consciousness. So I'm going to share my screen, and if there's a problem, please let me know. And I hope Can everyone just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me well enough, please?
Yes, ma'am, we are able to hear you clearly.
Great. Okay.
You'll be presenting the PPT, ma'am?
Sorry?
From your end, will you be presenting the PPT or should we be presenting it for you?
I'll present the
Thank you, ma'am.
PPT from my screen. Yes. And can everyone see it? I had sent it across to you in case there was an issue, but if everyone can see it, so is everyone able to see the screen?
Yes, ma'am, we are able to see the screen.
Okay, perfect. Right. So yes, like I said, I will be starting my session today with a story, and this is a story that comes, some of you might know it. It's the legend of Bon Bibi, a story that comes from the Sundarbans, which is, as you may know, the largest mangrove delta in the world, a region that is immensely fertile, that is very rich, very diverse, but also such a delicate ecosystem. And as is often the case with folklore, there are many versions of the story. So here's a simple one that I'm offering. And the story goes something like this. There is Dokinrai, is a demon who was once human, but who assumes the form of a tiger, and Dokinrai terrifies people who live in the forest and in the tidal islands, and they live in constant fear of him. Now this goes on until Bon Bibi comes along. Bon Bibi, who is the woman of the forest, and Bon Bibi comes to defeat him in this incredible battle. Now Bon Bibi is also very just and compassionate in her victory. So she says to Dokinrai, look, I will offer you one part of this wilderness. This is yours, under the condition that you will not attack people. And in return, she gives him her word and says, the people who live here, they will also not encroach upon what is your territory. They will leave you be. And so Dokinrai the tiger retreats, and Bon Bibi becomes the people's protector, the person that they turn to. Now there's peace for a while, but of course, as it happens, the peace is shattered. And the peace is shattered when a honey hunter, a group of honey hunters led by a honey hunter called Dona, decide that they want now to go deep into the forest to get honey. Now what Dona does is that he also entices his very young nephew Duki into joining him on this expedition. Now Duki's mother, Duki's a young child, so his mother is reluctant to let her child go on this expedition to go into the forest, and in her unease, she tells him, okay, if you must go, but if you are ever in danger, if something goes wrong, call out to Bon Bibi. Now the honey hunters set off. Duki goes with his uncle, and they go, as they get more and more honey, they can't stop. They keep going deeper and deeper into the forest, driven by this appetite. And soon they are in tiger territory. They are in the land of Dokinrai. And of course, Dokinrai, featured here in this very beautiful illustration, which is from Amitav Ghosh's book and illustrated by Salman Tur. Dokinrai is featured here, the tiger. And Dokinrai is, of course, he's enraged. Why are they in his land? Why are they on his land? Now a barter, an exchange is made between the tiger and the boy's uncle. And Dokindrai says, I'll give you boats filled with honey. And in return, what does he ask for? He asks for the young flesh of the child. He says, give me Dukhi. And before Dukhi even knows it, in the blink of an eye, his uncle has abandoned him, gone back home with his boats that are filled with honey. And here he is left with this tiger, Dokindrai, just inching closer and closer to him. And it's at this point that Dukhi recalls his mother's words and he cries out to Bon Bibi. And of course, Bon Bibi, who is the woman of the forest, who is the protector of the people, comes to his aid at once. Now, Bon Bibi returns Dukhi back home safely, but she tells him, when you go back, this is the message that I want you to carry with you, that no one will ever step foot in the forest if they have actually come to take more than they need. This is a photograph of Bon Bibi in the forest, in the mangrove forest of the Sundarbans, and till this day, the people who live in the Sundarbans, which is also such a multi-faith community, all of whom, before they enter the forest, they pray to Bon Bibi. They ask for her permission and her protection before they enter. Now, the reason that I shared this story is because I think it so beautifully captures the gamut of eco-consciousness. It spotlights so many things. The vital relationship between the human and the non-human, where there is awe and there is wonder, but there is also the very real fears and tensions that arise from living side by side. It spotlights the reality of shared dependency and shared vulnerability, because here you have this enormous ecosystem that is home to tigers, to crocodiles, to snakes, to such a rich variety of flora and fauna, but is also home to its people. And what does it mean to share a home? It highlights the complexity of this theme of human-animal harmony and of conservation, because where you have deforestation, you have oil spills in the Sundarbans, you have a loss to the habitat, and yet you have that on the one hand, and you have the extremities of weather, the whole fragility of living in a region where there is such a changing relationship between land and sea, which means that people's livelihoods, their lives depend so much on the forest. Now, the story raises also such vital questions. Can these boundaries, these respectful boundaries, always remain respectful? Can these boundaries be easily maintained? What happens when an equilibrium is challenged? Whose needs do we consider first? Whose perspective do we look at? Who do we prioritize in a crisis? And can we always look at multiple perspectives and act? Are we always able to do this? Now, these are big questions and difficult questions, and they're not easily answered at all. But in a sense, this is where the legend becomes a lifeline or a living story, because it is able to offer, it is no longer something that is contained or just in any fiction, but really spills over into real life, becomes a way of accessing and thinking and living with everything that all of the difficult, complex issues that we face. And so I see eco-consciousness as something that is nurtured by what I think of as really living stories, as lifelines. And these stories do so many things. They express a sense of wonder. They're able to explore the idea of home, what it means to belong, what it means to be connected and be part of this world from very different perspectives. They facilitate conversation on the relationship between human and non-human others. These stories can become a resource in themselves. They can provide a framework to think and to act and to engage meaningfully with ecological issues. And going back to that very lovely notion that Dr. Rangarajan spoke about of stories as being traces, as leaving traces. I've worked in the area of children's literature throughout my career, and the reason that I see it as such a wonderful space to work in is because it is a very, very vibrant site for really seeding ideas that can nurture this sense of eco-consciousness, not really handing down or looking at a particular message, rather taking living questions forward in a time when we are dealing with planetary crisis on an unprecedented scale, when in our own everyday lives we're able to see it. I'm going to be talking about two of my works, one of which implicitly, I think, deals with or uses eco-consciousness, and one of which does it more explicitly. And I'll start with this work, which is a wordless picture book that was inspired by my maternal grandmother, excuse me, sorry, Basanta Bharatan, my grandmother had a passion for repurposing and for what is now we call upcycling as well. And through the course of my childhood, I really witnessed how she extended the lifespan of materials. And most memorably, she did this with her own saris. And I saw her sari through the course of my childhood become a tablecloth, become cushion covers or pillowcases, and at times bits even made their ways into dresses for my dolls. So the illustrations for this book I did to keep to the spirit of reusing that my grandmother believed in. I combined drawing with textile collages, and I used a single piece of fabric for the sari itself, but used leftover scraps and textile waste to create everything else in the book, to in some way evoke the spirit of what she, I think, represented and what she just naturally did all her life. These are I just wanted to share a couple of pictures of when I was working on the book. These were just work in progress, where I was cutting out figures, playing around with the cloth, moving things around. And these are some spreads from the actual book to just kind of show you how the story moves. The girl discovers that there's a hole. Her grandmother takes it and goes to her sewing machine to start making something. There are bits that are become different things. And then what happens? And that's sort of the story of this book. So just some notes that I'd like to share with respect to circling back to eco-consciousness is that my grandmother didn't see herself as an eco-hero, and her approach to being careful, being resourceful and creative with the things around her was simply a part of who she was. And this book really developed from these memories that I had, these very visual memories of her working while I played. So I did not set out to create a story with a particular message at all. I started with tapping into these personal memories and let that guide me. In a sense, I find that this book is wordless because it only could have been wordless because I didn't need to say anything. I feel like the pictures do all the talking, show her really creating work, show her making something new out of something old. The next book that I want to share with you is the book that Harshita mentioned, Ammu's Bottle Boat. Usually I write and illustrate my own work, but for this book I got to collaborate with a wonderful illustrator. And this book is much more explicit in engaging with eco-consciousness. I wrote the text for this book. It's a book on single-use plastic, and the child in the book, Ammu, throws away a plastic bottle after playing with it, and she doesn't really think about what happens to it after she's discarded it. And as she goes on with her day, the book traces the journey of her bottle boat as it slowly sort of makes its way into the ocean. Now, for this book, my starting point was a preoccupation with the afterlives of discarded objects and trash. The reflection I think emerged from looking at this in my own life is how so much of violence, everyday violence, I think that we do to the environment is so casual. It's so easy for us to forget about what's happening to what we throw away, because when you don't see something anymore, you don't think about it. And we disengage when we no longer see. And we also disengage because we do not have to face the immediate consequences or, bear the cost of what is then borne by other humans and non-humans. So one of the things that struck me, or one of my what I wanted to focus on, was these seemingly small, careless acts that really don't scare us as much as they should, because we read about landfills that are getting filled with plastic that cannot biodegrade. We read about giant vortices of trash that make their way into the ocean, but we don't make the connection between our everyday lives and the larger picture there. And so I started with looking at this in my life, because I think that is a natural starting point for me. And then as I reflected on this, I wondered, okay, how do I weave these concerns creatively and effectively into a story? So one of the things that I then decided was that this would have to be about lives in parallel, about really showing a day in Ammu's life and side by side showing the journey of the plastic bottle. So in the book, and I'll be sharing some spreads with you and reading out a bit from it, her everyday activities, as they unfold in and around her home, in tandem, you also see what could happen to different creatures, whether it's a fish or a seal or a whale, who encounter the plastic then in their home, which is the ocean. So I hope with this book to kind of create a narrative where children are really able to imagine each of these moments and to see each of these animals as individual creatures and beings whose lives matter as much as theirs. So this is, I'll just be sharing some few spreads, but also read aloud because this is a book in verse. So by this point, she has thrown the bottle away and it's slowly making its way into the ocean. So while she laughs with her friends at school, the boat swirls around in a dirty pool. While Ammu buries treasures in the soil, the boat has a coat of chemicals and oil. While Ammu and Amma run and play catch, the boat reaches the ocean's garbage patch. While Ammu sits down with a book to read, a hungry fish looks for its next feed. Ammu and the fish don't have a clue what plastic in the ocean can do. Ammu doesn't know that there's a seal who's about to eat its very last meal. Something that I also wanted to share with respect to this book is the artwork in this book is inspired by their ink impressions that are inspired by a form which is a traditional, actually Japanese method of fish printing that originated as a way for fishermen to record their daily catches. So the traditional form itself used fish as printing plates. But during our early discussions, the illustrator who's made the artwork in this book, Aindri Chakravarti, she floated the idea of creating the art using ink impressions of plastic objects. And I thought this was just such a wonderful idea. It was completely in tune with the theme of the book. And also at this juncture, like, it's so important to think about how plastic really is everywhere. It's found its way into our bloodstream. It's entered the bodies of animals. It's seeped into the water table. So for me, her very tactile engagement with the theme, her use of actual plastic objects really spoke to the ways in which the organic has been displaced by the inorganic. So just to kind of also, because materiality is, as a practitioner and a researcher, I call myself a practitioner researcher because my practice is connected to my research. And I think my preoccupation with materiality in my books also comes from being a practitioner. So this book for me was such a wonderful opportunity to connect different things, because there is the materiality thematically in the book because it's about the afterlife of discarded objects. It's also about the relationship between people and objects, a relationship that is so much part of our everyday, again, that perhaps we don't think enough about, and something that was a starting point for me. And I love the fact that while working with this illustrator, she actually used plastic in the creative way that she has. I want to leave or close my presentation with some thoughts on, I think, for those of you who are interested in children's literature, just some very simple ideas and tools that I hope can be reflection points. And I think maybe the first and best place to start is thinking about what matters to you and why does it matter to you. And starting with your life and your surroundings and your everyday. For me, starting with when a story becomes alive, or for a story to be alive, it has to be meaningful to you. It has to matter to you. And that's why I suggest that perhaps these are good places to start. And some very, I think, simple, again, tools, things that are wonderful to really tap into and that can make your own work come alive is looking at the connection to your own childhood, looking at your past and your current experiences. First-hand observation and witness, again, which is why I said your everyday life, your surroundings, starting there. There's nothing that is more valuable than that, because characters, stories, everything comes alive when you find that seed, you find that connection. And finally, finding your ground, finding, what is it that animates you? Finding that and starting there is perhaps a way to start to engage critically, to be in active dialogue with something really as enormous as eco-consciousness. So I'll stop presenting now.
Sorry, Niveditha ma'am, thank you so much for your patience. That was really an interesting start to the session with your presentation. To continue the vibrancy of your presentation towards a conversation, we have some questions to which we would like to know your take and perspective. So the first question we have is, what is your take on infusing environmental literacy in children's works? Because stories for children, at least in the Eastern context, have been populated with animals and birds since the time of Panchatantra. How is it that children acquire environmental literacy
through abstraction and imagination which are there in these stories to material practical aspects of environmental literacy, how to solve problems in the real world.
Thank you. So you mentioned that environmental themes, or there have always been stories that feature animals, and that's absolutely true. There's I think folkloric traditions in the world, across cultures, across traditions, do actually engage so beautifully with a diverse set of themes and topics. But often when we look at, because you mentioned the Panchtantra, I thought it was relevant to say this, that with fables like that, they really recruit animals to talk about very human themes. These stories use animals as they become more symbolic rather than discussing the lives of real animals. So I think in contemporary Indian children's literature, there are so many, I think, both in the area of fiction as well as children's non-fiction. You have many writers, artists who are working on being able to creatively bring across so many of these topics to children. But I think one of the vital differences or the shifts that has occurred is that you are engaging children in dialogue. You're really seeing them as equals. You are using activities or questions or nudges and prompts and imaginative ways of making these topics come alive. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, ma'am. So the second question we have is, do you agree with the idea that children encounter their environments with tabula rasa and children's books enable them to negotiate the world around them with greater awareness and sensitivity?
I feel like this is a very big philosophical question, really. But one of the things that I've really learned from, so a lot of my work, I've written some work for older children. One of the things, though, that my work is primarily for younger children, and something that I've really learned by watching young children is their ability to really use all of their senses, sensory intelligence in young children, and how they are learning to respond to the world around them through their senses is something I constantly learn from. So I think when we talk about eco-consciousness in particular, and I want to kind of connect your question to the point of eco-consciousness, and I see children as somehow being naturally able to think with their senses, and that kind of sensory intelligence and sensory awareness is actually such a wonderful, it gives people who are working in this space, it gives children's books creators, I think, so much space to be able to then create for children. So really, when I am making work for children, I see, I look at, my experiences of growing up in my childhood, but I don't know if I think of them as blank slates at all. I see them as receptive, sensitive, intelligent beings who are constantly learning every day, who are constantly learning about the world. And in the process of engaging with children, we learn through them, we learn with them. And I think this dialogue between children and adults is what makes, I think, books that can reflect this dialogue between children and adults, because this is what happens in everyday life, and can do that successfully, are perhaps also the books where eco-consciousness doesn't just become a moral or a message, but it actually comes alive.
I totally agree with you, ma'am. Moving on to the next question. In the Indian context, eco-consciousness is there in our stories and our oral tradition. It's pervasive owing to the different spiritual, religious, and mythological influences. While children are consistently built in such ecologically sound environments, how much more do children's work with an eco perspective add value to their outlook towards the world?
I think children, we grow up with stories, certainly, but I'm not sure if all children have access to, or it's natural for these stories to be linked to their own lives. And currently, I think that is what a lot of children's book creators who are, there have always been wonderful, I think, writers, from the well-known ones like Ruskin Bond or Ranjit Lal or Zai Whitaker, who talked about nature and wildlife, and in their books who talked about conservation in very creative ways. But now you have a whole gamut of writers who, both in the spaces of fiction and non-fiction. You have wonderful creators like Rohan Chakravarti, who does work for children and adults, who's through the comic medium. You have people who are working in to blend fact and fiction. A wonderful work in non-fiction, which really talks about looking at an environmental history of India, is a book called Unearthed by Megha Gupta. You have Vijay Vacharajani's So You Want to Talk About the Environment, which again is actually something that creates active dialogue, that has active nudges, that can be participative and interactive. For young children, you have creators who are looking at so many ways of really stimulating such dialogue, starting with using wonder as a starting point. And that is something I think that's essential, really, that we have that. I think eco-consciousness can often become about, if it's just about going to be preachy, if it's just going to be tell children what to do, if the message is going to override the storytelling, then the message often doesn't go through. Whereas when the people who are working in this space actually are engaging with it in their own lives, then I think it can become very transformative. Then it can become a living story that then makes sense to children as an audience, because children are intelligent, receptive audiences. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. The last question for the session. Perry Nodelman, in defining the characteristics of children's literature as a genre, mentions that the focus of the work must be on action rather than description. Looking at this in the children's literature genre from an activist standpoint, the children's author has to make her or his work practically implementable, like you have done with your picture books Ammo's Bottle Boat and Amama's Sari. So what are your thoughts on how to encourage a responsible and a sustainable mindset in children through children's book, both through the visual and the verbal medium?
Thank you. That's a really great question. I feel like you've asked really good questions, and I hope that my answers are actually also offering something insightful for you. But so I think a lot of, I've been a practitioner. I am a creator of children's books, but I've also been an editor, and I've had the privilege of actually working on children's nonfiction as well. And I can offer you some, I think, wonderful examples of creators who, there are examples and examples, but I'll offer you a few, just to show you how creators have actively engaged, far more actually than I have or ever could, because some of these people that I'll be talking about, their work is deeply connected to their actual work in their daily life is connected to the work that they create for children. One of the books that I worked on as an editor is a book called Let's Plant Trees. It was a picture book by Vinod Lal Hira Ishwar, who and this book, the most beautiful thing about it, it's a simple book on planting trees, but the visual aspect of it, as well as how the book came with actual seeds to plant. Now, this is a call to action like no other. That's one example that I can give you. Another wonderful example is if you haven't heard of him, you must look him up, is the naturalist and the writer, the educator Yuvan Avis, who works with coastal geographies, who works very closely with children as well. And he has created this wonderful book called Shore Walk, which is actually he conducts shore walks. He walks with children and takes them on walks. This book is about really this beautiful intertidal zone, this zone between, it's a walk on the seashore. It's the child who's walking with her grandfather on the seashore, and all of the things that they then see. And this is such a wonderful example of somebody whose practice then makes this work that they're creating in this space so strong and so meaningful. Finally, an example that I'd like to offer, and going back to why I said personal connection matters so much, is a wonderful wordless book called Dugga, which is by the illustrator Rajiv White. And in this book, this is a true story. It's based on the true story of his dog and how it was adopted. But it really shows, I think, both the vulnerability and the resilience of street animals, and also shows multiple perspectives of what it means to live with them, but also what it means to take care of them. And it's such a beautiful work because of this personal connection. So I'm offering these examples to say that there are more and more calls to action in works like this, because the creators have started from a place that is meaningful to them, and I think that is the most critical aspect.
Thank you so much for your valuable sharing, ma'am.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to.
Any questions from the audience? Looks like they all require time to process your very illuminating talk, ma'am. If we get questions later, they shall be mailed to you.
All right.
The Department of Languages and Literature, English at Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning are grateful for the enriching and interactive environment you nurtured through your session. The topic chosen by you, ma'am, is not just timely but also vital. As our world grapples with issues such as climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation, Empowering children with the knowledge and empathy to address these challenges is imperative. We are grateful for your time and effort in taking part in this event. We have a small token of appreciation from us to you, which shall be posted to you soon. So we thank you so much for your time and your presence with us virtually, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed the session, and yes, feel free to send me questions and be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. With this, we come to the end of the forenoon sessions. We will join back tomorrow for the plenary sessions. Thank you.